U.S. Navy Captain Yuri Tabach. Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting.
I really can't stress enough how complicated this situation is. And we're just talking about a couple of days, but this conflict really reaches years back. Am I right?
Century. Yes, it does. But aside, please, I must compliment you on your colors today. That is very of the Ukrainian struggle for freedom. But as a similar to it, I must say that as we saw what went on not so long in Ukraine, while Ukraine had internal turbulence and their internal political differences being resolved, their neighbor Russia stuck a knife in their back, and that is a terrorist tactics. This is a terrorist move by your neighbor. The same thing we're seeing today in Israel, because it is like as you said, it is a high holiday season for Muslims and Jews and Christians. And today we see in Israel their internal turbulences where their people are trying to sort out in a democratic way with the protests, the differences between government and it happened everywhere. It happened in Poland, in Turkey, in the United States. We see that their neighbor sticks a knife in their back by starting to bombard. Of course, bombard them with the missiles and rockets. And most of the world is, again, standing by and watching it and trying to blame both sides. The Arab world, of course, is trying to blame everything on Israel. Russians are trying to blame everything on Poland and Ukraine and other former Soviet satellite countries. But I think if I could label myself of anything, as somebody who dealt mostly with fighting terrorism and anti-terrorism, pure terrorism. This is pure terrorism, and they use also the news, and they also use the media, and they use the word to it's bizarre to watch countries like Iran, like Jordan, like Arab world is lecturing Israel on democracy, or Russia lecturing Poland and Ukraine on democracy, countries that struggle and succeeded in democracies. As we everyone is different. Democracy is different. Yes.
Now, if I would like to ask you for, obviously we don't have time to go into history, but in the media outlet, a couple of days ago, there's another conflict started. Now, the flare-up of violence began when after Israeli police clashed with Palestinians inside Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, my question is, why did they even go there? Where's this raid coming from? And just so our viewers know, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound is the third holiest place in Islam. So it's not just another place. It is a very important place.
Yes, but it is also remember that it is a very important place for the Jews as well, because the veiling right there as well. It's part of it. Unfortunately, it happens every year. There's provocations every year that happen there. And of course, there are interesting parties to it. And this year, it just happens to be when there is an unrest inside of Israel. And they took the opportunity to use it as well. So, of course, it is a decades conflict that needs to be resolved. But I think what the root of the problem is a weak Western leadership. It didn't happen when we had strong leaders in the leading democratic countries in the West, in Europe and the United States. As soon as a weak leader takes position, the terrorists in Russia, the terrorists in the Arab world, in Iran, in North Korea, in China, they start taking an opportunity with this and acting. Israel was bombed on the 21st of January 2021. That day, it started the bombardment because they knew that the new administration is kind of pro-Arab, the oil prices and things like this. So it's politics. It has nothing to do with religion. I think the Jews and the Arabs and the Palestinians get along just fine if the politicians would not be involved and the parties that are interested in getting money from the United Nations. As long as there is fighting, United Nations will be supporting it. there's a whole block of the United Nations that just deals with this problem. So if this problem would go away, all these people that fly business class and stay in five-star hotels trying to resolve Israeli-Palestinian problem will lose their jobs and lose a lot of financing for it. So it all comes down to politics and money, unfortunately. But common people who want to pray their God at the Wailing Wall or the Al-Aqsa Mosque suffer for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, politics and money, that doesn't change. Doesn't matter where you are. That always comes in. That always comes in at some point. Now, today we learned that...
Blaming people is not... We need to blame the leadership that is also surrounding, the one that we chose, that we elected.
Well, but for now, I mean, leaders cannot be changed. So we have to deal what we have in front of us. Today we learned that 2 Israeli sisters were killed and their mother was critically hurt in shooting attack in the West Bank today. Now, it seems like this conflict is escalating. Do you think further escalation is possible?
It is possible, but again, it is, and it will escalate further if somebody doesn't stop. Again, we have to take a look at the bottom. When this blaming game starts, we lose focus. Who bombarded whom first? Who fired on Ukraine first? Who fired on Georgia first? Who fired on Israel first? And then they retaliate. And then it becomes, okay, everybody. Both sides need to scale it down. Well, both sides are not supposed to scale it down. And again, in the Israeli-Arab conflict, Israelis can destroy Gaza. They can destroy West Bank. They have enough weapons and enough soldiers to do it. But they choose not to do it. They choose to act civilized and only retaliate and warn the civilian population to leave the area. They're only trying to get to the terrorists who are causing this trouble. They have no intent to hurt civilian individuals. Contrary to what the Russians do by their attack, just as the Hamas is firing rockets at random. Wherever they land, whomever they kill, like those 2 sisters, the civilians, they killed, they celebrated. The same way Russians, they wipe the cities off the face of the earth. They celebrate. They're not fighting the army. They're fighting civilians, and that's what terrorism is. So we have to take a look who fights how. Israelis have all the firepower to kill everyone, but they choose not to. The Hamas, Hezbollah, the terrorist organizations, they fire everything they have and kill as many people as they can. The same thing Russians are doing, the same thing when the United Nations came up with their conclusion in their report, who started a war between Russia and Georgia, they blamed the Georgians. Why? Because Georgians were the first ones to fire on a Russian tank, but the Russian tank somehow was in a Georgian city. So it's the same thing if we see in Krakow a Russian tank and the Polish forces fire on the Russian tank in Krakow, that would mean that Poland started the war. That's the logic that the United Nations uses today. So we see those injustices and those biases all around the world, but the bottom line, we always have to take a look who started to bombard the civilian objects, who started to fire at will with disregard to human life. Was this Israelis or is the Hamas? Again, not the Palestinian people, the Hamas, the terrorist organization, or a Hezbollah, if that matter.
Now, however, it seems like this conflict has been taken to a new level because Israeli police chief Kobi Shabati said Israeli citizens who have gun permits should now carry them with them. Now, it sounds like this is taken to a whole new level. Do you think citizens, can act responsibly, or they're going to just take their anger out left and right?
I think that citizens always should act responsibly, as the government should. And if you cannot trust your citizens, then maybe you should change the government and be in a different country. I am an American, and we have a Second Amendment, a right to bear arms. And if you have to defend yourself, you bear arms. It does not mean that you have to take anger or on another civilian, even because he's of different religion than you. I think that Israeli citizens are responsible. We have very, very few cases throughout the history where Israeli citizens took law into their own hands. Most of it, 99.9%, is done for self-protection. So, of course, there are people that are mentally sick. Of course, there are people that are criminal. We're always going to have that. But it doesn't mean you should not trust your citizens and should not give them the permits to defend themselves and say, well, that's the police's for it. Well, then you shouldn't have a fire hydrant in your house because there's a fire department, and you should call the fire department when the fire starts and not use the fire hydrant to put the fire out. The weapons, the handguns, and the personal weapons are there for your personal protection of yourself, your family, your neighbors, and other civilian people who are at risk. And when their tensions are that high in Israel, yes, I believe that that every citizen, regardless which country they're, Poland, United States, Israel, if you trust your citizens, if you believe that your citizens chose you, voted you into the office because they trust you, then you should trust your citizens back.
And I can't agree with you more, sir. That's all we have time for. Thank you very much for giving your time and insights.
Thank you. Thank you for your callers.
Thank you very much. And thank you for watching TVP World. Stay with us for more news and news.